Look, I said it was coming, and here it is. Time to talk about the complex nature that is the Raiden Shogun's rule in Inazuma. Was she an evil archon who neglected her duties born of apathy to her people and her nation, thus causing a civil war? Or was she a scared archon who, for fear of what she saw during the cataclysm 500 years ago, chose to walk the path of eternity on behalf of her nation? I'd imagine the answer is somewhere in the middle, and combined with your own views on morality, influence whether or not you think of A as a bad archon, just because ultimately, regardless of her motives, the outcome was the same. A war happened, people died, yada yada yada. This is kinda tough, man. As much as I love clowning the Raiden Shogun mains, because you niggas are hilariously delusional, she was the first character I wailed on, so I do have a soft spot for her, but with that said, I owe my allegiance to Celestia and no one else, so I think I can remain fairly neutral here. Yeah, neutral, yeah, fuck 'em! That's not neutrality. But before we can get into her story and judge her rule, we need to first establish what makes a good archon. Well, to this point, Zhongli's story says something interesting in regards to an archon's duty. When speaking of the new archons, he states, quote, "Nor would the duty of guiding humanity be honored by the new archon." So, it seemed like guiding humanity was a duty of the archon, along with the obvious protection of the nation. His statement is interesting for a number of different reasons, just because as it stands right now, we have only met 3 of these new archons, and while they weren't guiding humanity in any traditional sense, they were doing their own things for their own people. Take Fontaine for instance. While on the surface it seemed like Farina was doing nothing but indulging herself for 500 years, in actuality, Focalors had committed every facet of her being, literally, in saving her nation from a prophecy. In Sumeru, well, I mean, Nahida was getting spawn trapped. Bro, they spawn camped her. So you can't even, like, make that assessment for her. Otherwise, that's fucked up. She ain't got a chance, man. And he knew she was captured too, but he probably still sat there like, look, I know you was captured, but you should have been guiding humanity from that cage, nigga. Now keep in mind, he said the new archons no longer guide humanity, indicating that it's something that was common amongst the old ones. So how does Barbatos line up? I mean, he wasn't present for most of Mondstadt's history, but according to Jean, did lay out the foundation for Mondstadt's ideals that last even today.
Go forth and establish a city of freedom without rule. We have not forgotten Barbatos' wish for Mondstadt.
Jean, you're such a devotee.
So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what does guiding humanity mean? What was he teaching him how to read and write? Like, it's a pretty broad term. And A, obviously we'll talk about later, but I just want to point that out just because I thought it was pretty funny. So if guiding humanity and protecting their nation is all that constitutes a good archon, how does A stack up then? To start, let's give a brief rundown on A's lore. Despite not being one of the original 7 archons, A did fight in the Archon War, winning it alongside her twin Makoto. And thinking Makoto would be the best fit to serve as the Archon of Inazuma, A sacrificed her body to allow Makoto to ascend to Celestia. Upon becoming the Archon, Makoto recreated A's body and let A serve as her Kage Musha. Due to them being identical twins, but A being the superior fighter, anytime conflict arose, such as Oribashi's rebellion, A would be the one to respond. This rang true until the Cataclysm, which according to Makoto necessitated the Archons.
Did you know what was about to happen in Conria?
I had some sense of it. That place was not somewhere that any Archon could afford to ignore.
We now know this is because they were summoned by Celestia, but I digress. A would eventually make her way to Conria, where she would find Makoto, who had died in the Cataclysm, but not just her. A's close friends would also end up dying one by one, with one especially tragic story involving A cutting off the arm of Chiyo, who had gone mad from abyssal corruption. Left all alone following the Cataclysm— No, she had Miko, huh? Yeah. Left with one person following the Cataclysm and terrified of the heavenly principles, A decided to create a puppet version of herself and place her consciousness within the Muso Ishin. She would then give up her gnosis to Miko, effectively cutting off her ties with Celestia. The puppet would rule Inazuma while she remained in her plane of euthymia, treading the path of eternity for her people, so that they don't get cubed to death like Conria did. The puppets would eventually get manipulated by the Fatui and Tri Commission and enact the Vision Hunt Decree, which stripped people of their visions. The loss of a vision led some individuals to lose memories and ambition. You know, sort of like lobotomized versions of themselves. This then sparked a civil war in Inazuma, which saw like, I don't even know, 3-4 people die, if that. Eventually, with the combined efforts of the Traveler and Miko, A would have the Shogun end the Vision Hunt Decree and take a more hands-on approach in ruling Inazuma. Yeah, so I mean, this isn't, the best track record, I'll give you that. A couple oopsies leading to a civil war, happens. Even if the Shogun was doing perfectly fine for 498 years or whatever, man, those last 2 years were rough. One thing I feel it's important to clarify is that while the Shogun was making its own actions in regards to the Vision Hunt Decree, Ei was completely aware of its actions and silently agreed with them.
I am quite well informed about the Vision Hunt Decree. Not so. Only everything that pertains to eternity. The Vision Hunt Decree has my tacit approval. The Fatui's actions thus far do not constitute a threat to eternity. Otherwise, they would have been purged long ago. Individual ambition is inherently incompatible with eternity. What you might not realize is that all too often, people have far more to lose by chasing their dreams. Consider this. No one will lose their life on account of having their vision taken away. Rather, those who have lost their lives are the ones who insisted on pursuing their own aspirations. Are they not?
Yeah, this bitch is she's just yapping, bros. On the surface, what she said sounds horrendous. She sounds dumb as fuck, honestly. It sounds like something Big Brother would be sitting there egging her on, like, yeah, she's spitting. She's spitting. What the fuck was that? In this clip, she says two things of note. One, ambition is incompatible with eternity, and two, people are wasting their lives chasing their dreams. These are quite the claims when taken at face value, but we can't do that. I mean, we can, but let's not, man. Framing these from the perspective of Ei, holding on to these beliefs as a means of shielding her nation from destruction by Celestia, shines some light on why she believes these things. Second only to the cryo archon, the cataclysm seems to have affected Ei the most of all the archons. Scared of what she saw in Conria, she aims to prevent the same fate from befalling Inazuma, and her way to go about doing that is eternal stagnation. If there's one thing we know Celestia hates, it's mankind's arrogation, and the moment people commit the sin of transgression, the heavenly principles respond by wiping out their nation. Think about it like this. Let's say there's an upper limit you're not allowed to cross into that. When you do, Celestia smokes you. This is probably what a normal nation with visions looks like. This was probably Conria, and this is what Ei wants her nation to be. Every nation that's been destroyed by Celestia was due to them reaching heights never intended for humans, be it the early peoples wanting to break free from their fates, desiring things never promised to them by the heavens, or Conria simply doing too fucking much. It's their ambitions that end up costing them everything, so when Ei says that ambitions are incompatible with eternity and people are wasting their lives chasing them, she means it literally. They will die if they do too much. It's not particularly due to something she believes, but because the laws of this world have been made by them. Try and fly too close to the sun and your wings will melt. She makes these claims so as to protect her people from the heavenly principles. Now with that said, there is a problem, which is she's generalizing. Everyone in her nation suffered under the assumption that all dreams may warrant some kind of response from the heavenly principles, but Ei forgot one crucial fact, which is, this isn't fucking Conria. A random nigga named Carl from Inazuma wishing for some more power from a vision to fight a chicken or some shit isn't the same as OG King Ermin wishing to break free from fates. Ultimately, her nation suffered for what was the worst case scenario that never came to pass. And while you can say hindsight is 2020, really? Again, this isn't Conria, and I feel it's important to keep bringing that up because Conria was founded on the premise of not wanting a god and eventually just fuck the gods, and her views were so heavily influenced by what happened in Conria. Now with that said, like I mentioned earlier, regardless of her motivations, the outcome was still the same, so it's up to each person to decide whether or not she was a bad archon. At the end of the day, you can use plenty of words to describe her rule as Inazuma's archon, but apathetic is not one of them. Ultimately, I think she cared too much to the point that she considered existing better than living for fear of total annihilation. Treading the path of eternity on behalf of her entire nation was never the problem. She did this for hundreds of years and no one cared. The problem was when the people's dreams started being interfered with because they were no longer allowed to dream.